the shared folder of the committee, and you should have access to that. And hopefully people got the chance to review in advance some part of that. So if you have any issues, again, access the folder, make sure that Paul know and myself know, and we'll make sure fix as soon as possible. One document is a 6-page summary of the findings of this fiscal analysis. One document is very long, more than 50 pages there, including very detailed methodology, assumptions, and logics, and all kinds of technical details of the fiscal impact analysis. And the last one is the slides that Jeff's going to go over today. And I think we have plenty of time today for him to go over everything related to the fiscal impact analysis, but also allow discussion and questions from this group. Now, this will not be the only meeting that's going to touch on the fiscal impact analysis. So after the meeting, if you have questions, feel free to send to us. And just for logistics, let people know next week we have no meetings because of holidays, and the following meeting, the third meeting, will be on January 3rd. But on January 10th, that will be the time we come back and talk about fiscal impact analysis, including going over Q&A and responding to all kinds of questions we might collect from this group there. And if you can, I'll send an email. But by Monday next week, if you have any questions related to fiscal impact analysis or over Hokubai design in general, please send us so that staff can working together to prepare the follow-ups when we meet next time. Okay, thank you. And Jeff, can you try to run it from your screen? Thank you.
Sure, yeah. And yeah, I think the share button needs to be turned on. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Let's see here. So it says, I can't share unless the host or co-host presenter makes me the presenter. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. So there we go. There's that. Okay. And there's that. Okay. Can everybody see that? Well, actually, it's the wrong screen. Let me switch this here. I wanted to share the other screen. Okay.
Oh, yeah, it's opening now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Holly, and good morning, everybody. Another early Tuesday morning. So as Holly mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about the fiscal impact analysis that we conducted as part of Hokubai by Design. We really appreciate your review of this and feedback on this presentation. Many of you are familiar with fiscal impact analysis. We did an analysis in 2019 with Urban Analytics, an outside consulting firm. So they did a fiscal impact analysis then. And so this analysis we did in-house, and I really appreciate Holly and the budget team for assisting me, given their knowledge, detailed knowledge of the budget. So we really refined the model, and we think it's a good product. And so I will be presenting an overview of this today. And as far as questions, feel free to ask questions. Generally, I find that sometimes the answers come a little bit later. So if you want to hold your question till the end, that might be best. But if you have a question that about something I said that wasn't clear, or you need further clarification, by all means, please ask. And then Holly, I'm not able to see the chat, so I don't know if you want to prompt me, or if people can jump in and verbally ask questions, that's fine as well. So with that, I will begin. So what is a fiscal impact analysis? It basically is it measures the cost and revenues to the public sector. So it looks at the county's general fund, and we also analyzed the fire and rescue reserve fund this time as well. And it looks at current levels of service. So basically, we looked at the 2022 population and employment levels in the county, and we used the FY 2023 budget, which began in 2022, July 2022, to project forward based on the future growth as envisioned by HOCO by design. So we want to stick, it's important, we want to stick with current levels of service. We don't want to presume that new growth will have greater levels of service or less levels of service. We're taking this where we are now with the county, and we're assuming those same levels move forward. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's a marginal analysis, meaning that it's only looking at the fiscal impacts of new growth. So what are the revenues from new growth and the costs attributed to new growth, both operating costs and capital costs. And we've done this analysis as part of the scenario planning with HOCO by design the last year or so, and you could look at different growth scenarios to see the ultimate fiscal impacts of each of these growth scenarios. This particular analysis updates to the latest 2023 budget, and it also looks at the growth scenarios in HOCO by design, or the one scenario sort of envisioned by HOCO by design. So last time we gave a review of HOCO by design, and at the end I gave a review of the growth assumptions. So I'm going to review those quickly to kind of remind us where we are. So I started with this one chart here. This is the APFO chart that's in HOCO by design in the draft plan, and it basically creates caps for new residential growth by these various areas. We've been growing this way, or we've had this APFO chart for a long time, since 1992. Each general plan, which is updated every decade or so, has this chart in it. And so this is what we're envisioning in the draft plan now. 9,000 units over the time period 2026 to 2040. The reason it starts with 2026 is because the intent is to adopt this plan this spring. So the first APFO chart attributable to this general plan would be in July 2023. And the way APFO works, we start giving out housing unit allocations when plans come in 3 years in advance. So in 2023, we'll start giving out 2026 allocation. So this is the first year of the chart will be 2026. So activity centers, 9,000 units total, 600 per year. Downtown Columbia is really based on the downtown plan. So it's the plan has already been adopted, and this is the continuation of it. The plan is probably about a third through. So there's another 2/3 of the plan left. And then we have the other character areas. I'm going to show the map in a second to remind us of where that is. The rural west is everything east of the plan, west of the planned service area, boundary, no water or sewer, about 100 per year. And then we have the green neighborhood allocations, which are based on the green neighborhood provisions in the subdivision regulations. So this is the future land use map, otherwise known as the flume. And this shows the colors of the various activity centers. So anywhere you see the word activity center in those colors, that is what takes part of the 600 units per year. So whether it's the regional activity center, which is Gateway, the transit activity center, the industrial mixed use activity center, the village activity center, or the mixed use activity centers. And, Amy talked about those last time in the plan. There's a lot of discussion about these activity centers in the plan, but the intent is we're going to concentrate most growth in these activity centers. And just a reminder that we don't have any projections, both residential and non-residential, for Gateway, which is this big area right here, because the intent is to do a master plan for Gateway in order to determine what the community actually wants in Gateway, and also most importantly, to make sure that as part of the plan, we have adequate infrastructure, adequate schools, adequate water and sewer, parks and recreation, public safety, et cetera. So the master plan, similar to the downtown plan that was adopted about a decade ago, more than a decade ago, it will ensure that there's adequate infrastructure for Gateway for whatever is visioned there in the future. So HOCO by design calls for a master plan moving forward. If that master plan gets conducted in the time frame of this plan, then Gateway could use some of those activity center allocations. The chart can also be amended in the future too. The chart would have to be amended if, for example, the Gateway master plan was adopted and we wanted more units to be added in a certain time frame. And again, the apple chart is a way to cap growth. It's a way to manage growth, to basically make sure that no more than the 19 or the 1,400 units per year get built in the county, to make sure that infrastructure is adequate along the way. So as far as the fiscal impact analysis, we projected over 18 years, 25,000 units. That includes the 21,500 in the chart I just showed you. Plus, since we're using the FY23 budget in 2022, we wanted to get the next 3 years as well. And this is based on the latest land use projections. And this comes from really plans that are permitted, so they're under construction, they have building permits, recently recorded lots, other phase plans. So we anticipate that we could, depending on the market, we could see that many units over the next 3 years. And then at that point, HOCO by design kicks into gear. And then you see the rest of the 21,500 as a cap. The other one thing to keep in mind too is that these units here, we don't have the capacity for all these units in the county, as I discussed last time. So the zoning regulations and the subdivision regulations will need to be amended as envisioned in the plan over the next 3 years. And then when the plans, so 3 years or so, and then by the time the plans come in, then we might realize this capacity. But this capacity is dependent on the zoning changes as we move forward. So that is that, about 1,400 units per year. That's about, I mentioned last time, the county over the last 2 decades has been building about 1,500 or 1,600 units per year. So this is a little slower, not much slower, but again, as I mentioned before, it is a little greater than the capacity we have. So it's a balanced approach. That's what we really are moving forward and thinking about HOCO by design as a sort of a balanced plan moving forward. So these are the units right here. And just if you look at the total units, and most of the future units will be multifamily, rental apartments and condos, and then some townhomes, less single family detached than we've been used to. And that's because of the dwindling land supply for single family detached units, and with the activity center implementations, then there's going to be a more mixed use development, which includes more multifamily units. And then you can see here by planning area, most of the future units are in Columbia, and most of those are in downtown Columbia per the downtown plan, although it does also include some activity center potential in Columbia, like the Snowden, Dobbin area, and the Village Center activity centers. And there might be not be another one as well in that area. And then you can see in Elk Ridge and Ellicott City have this many units over the 18 years, about 5,000. Rural West, the least. The plan, by the way, calls for potential missing middle or I guess townhouse or duplex, quadplex type development in the crossroads in the rural West. And so that's why you have some townhomes projected in this particular scenario in the rural West. And then you have the southeast part of the county, which includes Laurel and the areas along Route 1, south of 175. As far as the non-res, we're projecting 31,500 units. That's an average about 1,750 per year, which is about 2/3 or 60%, something like that, of the 3,000 or a little over 3,000 units the county's been experiencing over the last 20 years. We don't expect that same employment growth to continue, again, primarily because of the land supply is becoming less, although we are creating more capacity for non-res, similar to residential, in the activity center proposals moving forward. So this is just an estimate of the future job growth that we think is reasonable. We did have, for example, the BRAC experience, the base realignment and closure, which was a major federal base realignment that happens every so often. And it happened after 2010, primarily impacting Fort Meade. So there was a lot of job growth related to that in Howard County. And there is still continued growth, I think, at Fort Meade. I'm not quite clear on how much that is, so we expect some impacts, but most of that impact from that area has been realized. And so moving forward, the future job projections are a little bit, we're not 100% sure how it's going to work, particularly also given the office changes in office demand, given teleworking and all of that. So what we think this is, for the purposes of the fiscal analysis, a reasonable estimate moving forward, and a realistic estimate moving forward. Most of those jobs are office jobs, followed by retail, and then industrial manufacturing and warehousing.
Hey, Jeff, Todd here. I'm a little confused. You talk about these as jobs, but it's all, from planning purpose, it's all based on square footage per job type.
Yes.
So all of this translates back into square footage somehow?
Yes, exactly. That's a really important point. So it does, from the fiscal perspective, the only fiscal impact from jobs really, is the new building space for the most part. So yes, it translates back to square footage of new building space, and then we get property tax from that new building space. So another reason why the job growth, like, we might have more job growth in this, but it could be people working from home, but that really doesn't have a fiscal impact on the county because that home is already there and the person's already living there. So, but this job growth really reflects the job growth as it impacts the fiscal impact for the county, if that makes any sense. But yeah, that's a good point. So here's I'm going to talk about the results and then go into some of the details of the methodology. So we ran this analysis. So over 18 years, the average annual, the first column there is average annual fiscal impact results. Average annual is 52 million over the 18 years. So that's a net positive impact from the new growth. And this is similar to results that we saw with the urban analytics study a couple of years ago, and also many other studies that the county's done in the past. And not only Howard County, but other counties in Maryland. New growth pays for itself, and we'll talk about why that is in a moment. Most of the revenues comes from property tax. So you can see 77.9 million is property tax. We also analyzed the fire and rescue reserve fund, and most of the revenues in that fund come from also a property tax assessment. And you see you get 17 million from new growth from that. And then the second greatest is income tax. And then so another important revenue is the one-time revenues. So when you have new construction, there's one-time revenues realized when that house or when that commercial space is built. And I'll talk about more of those down the road. But those are also very important revenue sources. And one of the major reasons, quite frankly, that new growth is fiscally positive because of these one-time revenues, which we'll get into a little bit later. And then the greatest cost, as we know, is to the Howard County Public School System, 42 million, followed by public safety, which includes fire and police there, since we're analyzing the fire fund. And then we also looked at all the capital costs, and the greatest capital cost is the Howard County Public School System. We also looked at what the fiscal impacts are in year 1 and year 18. We have the 18-year spreadsheet model that shows all growth. This chart just shows the year 1 fiscal impacts of 30 million. Year 18 is 74 million, because you have that growth built up over 18 years. In that year, you're going to end up with greater fiscal impacts for that year. And the average, again, is 52 million for the 18 years. So all of these details of how the methodologies used are in this document that Holly mentioned that's been uploaded to the portal. It's called the Methodology and Assumptions Document, appropriate name. And so you can look through that and look at all the details and evaluate our thinking behind the methodologies for this. We didn't want to create a black box. The point is to try to be as transparent as possible. Here's the variables we use. Here's the factors. Here's the rationale. Here's the reason. There's a lot of variables. So if there's different thoughts and opinions on this stuff, we think it's pretty solid, but you can do scenario testing to see, well, what if the market value wasn't this high, this kind of thing. So the model is we're able to do the sensitivity analysis testing for the projections. And that's the most valuable part of fiscal impact analysis. It's really not a budget projecting system. It doesn't necessarily project the budget, but it really is a tool to look at potential fiscal impacts from new growth based on assumptions. So this is a summary of the FY23 general fund budget. So the current budget that was in effect beginning last year. So it's about $1.3 billion. We took out the one-time revenues from prior years. Since the prior year funds that were extra use of prior year funds, since that's a limited one-time use, we didn't include them. We didn't assume they're going to continue on. So this budget doesn't quite match the actual budget because we took those out, but it's $1.3 million. And you can see the costs on the right matches that. And most of the revenues are property tax and income tax. So 90% of the revenues are those two sources, as we all know. So really, those are the most important. If you think about methodology, those are the most important things to make sure you get right. How do you project property taxes and income taxes? And I'll talk about how we do that in the next few slides. And then if you can look at the fire assessment, that's also based on the property tax rate for the fire assessment. That's an additional 152 million. So this is the results of the fiscal impact for new growth over the 18 years, both residential and non-residential combined. And if you look at the property tax, it comes and income tax, those both amount to 90%. So the future projections of the fiscal impacts of new growth is also 90%, which you'd expect given we're using the current budget structure moving forward. As far as the costs are concerned, this is the general fund budget. The largest percentage of costs is education, about 63% of the total. That includes Board of Education, community college, and library. You can see in the upper right, it divides that up. If you just look at Board of Education, it's about 56%, and that includes debt service. So debt service is about 4%, and then the operating is 52%. And so again, the education or the school projections is an important part of the fiscal analysis. And then it's followed by public safety at 12%, and then public facilities, which most of that is public works, and then community services and general government. You can see the rest of the percentages there. About 6% is based on capital, debt service, and reserves. And then the fire budget, you can see the details of the fire budget broken down, 152 million by the different functions and bureaus in the Fire and Rescue Services Reserve Fund. So this is the results of the fiscal model for new growth by those same categories there. So it's a more detailed version of what we showed before. And you can see that 50%, similar to the current budget from new growth, is for Howard County Public School System, not including debt service. Debt service is out of this particular calculation here. It shows up at a different place. And then that's followed by police at 14%. And then you can see the various other revenue sources beyond that. So we try to look at every single line item in the budget, quite frankly, to project forward. Public Works is the third greatest at 8%. So this is like a summary slide, and then we'll go into a little bit detail on some of the methodologies we used for property tax and income tax, et cetera. So why does new growth generate net positive revenue? That's the big question. Why does, people think that growth can't pay for itself, but does it pay for itself? Why does it pay for itself? And the main reason it does in Howard County is that, new homes that are built and new commercial space as well, they're larger and more expensive. So relative to the base, the new homes are expensive. So you're going to have greater property taxes and income taxes. And given that's 90% of the revenues to the county, that has a big impact. And the other thing is one-time revenues, as I mentioned. So you have one-time revenues from new construction. Here's an example there. So let's say you have a 2,800 square foot house, 500,000 home. The school surcharge is $7.50 per square foot. So that generates $21,000. That was increased recently from like $1.32, phased in over 3 years. So now it's $7.50 a square foot. So the school surcharge, which is an excise tax, generates that much. And then you have the road excise tax of $4,700. And then there's a transfer tax, the county transfer tax of another $6,200, and then recordation taxes. So when a house is built, in this example, that house is paying, $34,000 one time to the county at time of construction. So that has a big impact. If you have, 1,400 homes built per year, every year, that's an important part of the fiscal structure of the county. And then non-residential also contributes to growth as well. And non-residential, of course, doesn't have school costs, so it comes out positive. And it's an important, a very important part of the county's budget structure as well. So again, all these assumptions are in this document that is been uploaded to the portal. So talking about some of these methodologies. So there's really three types of revenue methodologies. There's the marginal approach, which really means sort of you're not dividing and creating averages. You're basically looking at what you have now and trying to project it forward marginally. And it's important because income taxes, as you'll see, that methodology is also based on the value of the house. If the assumption is if you have a certain cost for a home, you need a certain income, household income to purchase that home, which translates into income taxes. So that's why we did a marginal approach for that. And then the more minor revenues, the 10%, we used a per capita and employee approach. Basically, you take the revenue, divide it by the number of people or employees in the county, assume that's going to continue moving forward. And I have some examples of that. And then for capital, which is also a big cost to the county, we use marginal approaches for those in many cases. So for example, the road excise tax and school surcharge and transfer and recordation taxes, I'll show an example of that, how we calculate those marginally. So for the property tax, we basically, it's straightforward. You multiply the assessed value of the new house being built times the property tax rate of 1.04 or something per 100, and then you just project that forward, moving forward. And we looked at all of these various home values. So by planning area and by unit type, single family, detached, townhouse, condos, and the model does project accessory dwelling units, like 500 or so. So we made some assumptions for accessory dwelling units. These rates are based on the latest property tax data that for homes sold in 2020 and 2021. Now they're high because we had the value of homes actually was pretty high in 2020 and 21. It's for all homes that had been built in 2015 or later. So basically, we're trying to capture the value of newly constructed homes, not the value of all homes in the county, because newly constructed homes is what's going to be happening moving forward. So these are the market values assumed here. And then the assessed values are typically lower than the market values. And so on average, they're about 92%. So you apply that. And then this is the assessed value is what the property tax rate is multiplied times. And, again, these can be adjusted to see what if analyses to determine what if the market values were lower or higher or whatever. The non-residential uses, we looked at recent non-residential uses also from SSTAT, the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, to get these rates per square foot. For apartment values, we used a income capitalization methodology, which is what the State Department of Assessments uses, and it's based on the average monthly rent. We had a recent 2022 Howard County rental survey was prepared that it's done for the Housing Commission, and so we got the average monthly rent for an upper tier apartment unit, because that what's being built now, for example, in downtown Columbia and parts of Route 1 are these, they're more expensive than what's on the ground now. And so we used the average rent of $2,275 and then use cap rates and different formulas, the formula of a cap rate to determine the estimated market value per unit of about 383,000. So that would be assessed on the apartment building based on the number of units in the building to the owner of that building. So that's the property tax methodology. The income tax methodology, we also did a marginal approach. And the approach we did for that was first of all, you take the market value that we just saw, assume a 20% down payment. So the loan amount would have to be, in this case, this is a new single family detached home in Elkridge, about $650,000. The loan amount would have to be about $518,000, assuming a 20% down payment. And then based on the loan interest rate and deductions of, actually, I'm sorry, the loan interest rate, and then you determine the mortgage payment, and then the property taxes, plus the HOA fees, which most new developments have, and insurance, you come up with a total monthly payment estimate. Now, I do know that loan interest rate is low, right? Because interest rates are now 7%. But at the time we did this, we assumed 5%. We could do sensitivity analyses. If that loan was to go up, things can happen, right? Either if the loan goes up, obviously the monthly payment goes up, which means the gross income has to go up to live in that house, which means the income tax revenues to the county are even greater. On the other hand, if the loan interest rates go up, it could be argued that the market value is going to go down. So these are all these variables you can evaluate to try to get an estimate of these things. And so once you have the monthly payment, then you use the HUD affordability ratio of 28%. So typically, HUD says that your monthly payment shouldn't be more than 28%. And then based on that, a household income of about $150,000 is required to purchase a house of $650,000. And then we came up with an estimate of the net income, because you get deductions, mortgage interest deductions, and things of that nature, exemptions for household members, and you get adjustments to the AGI. And you end up with an estimate of 110 of the net income. And so you multiply that net income times the tax rate, the local tax rate, Howard County rate of 3.2%, and you end up with the tax amount each year for that house of $3,500. So we did this for every single house type and every single planning area to project forward. For rental units, same thing. We used basically the monthly payment to determine what you needed to be able to have for income to be able to afford that monthly payment, household income. And then you end up with the net income, which is taxed. So the annual tax for somebody renting an apartment is about $2,400. We did reduce that some more because for multifamily, there's between a 10 or 15 or 20% MIHU requirement for new multifamily apartment units for all zones, and based on it depends on the zone whether it's 10% or 15% or 20%. So we use 15% as an average, and we assume that 15% of those units, the people living them would have 60% of the market income, which is the way that the affordable housing tax program works. I think it's between 60 and 80%. So we averaged 60%, and then based on a weighted average, we assume 15% were moderate income housing units and 85% market, and come up with a kind of a weighted average moving forward to project the income tax for those households. By the way, moderate income housing units are also required for single family detached projects and also for townhouse projects. Although typically the affordable units aren't built in those cases because it's very difficult to build affordable single family detached and even townhouse units. And so the developer instead pays a fee in lieu to the Department of Housing. And then that fee in lieu money is used by the Department of Housing to provide affordable housing throughout the county through various programs, rental assistance and things of that nature. Kelly Simino can talk a lot more about that.
Hey, Jeff, Todd here.
Yes.
One question on this, because you brought it up, and I want to go backwards to a previous slide. Did you also use the 15% number when you were determining the value of the multifamily apartments, or is it only used in income tax collection?
It's only used in income tax collection. And, you know, it's interesting. It's a good question. Again, I was thinking about that, right? So I guess we could apply the 15%, which would lower the property values. Although the question I have is, given the actual moderate income housing units that are built are apartment units. So 15% of apartment units are in let's say there's a 200 unit apartment project. 15% of them are for moderate income households, and the rent they pay is less. But is that apartment unit as a whole assessed any less because it has those units in it? I don't know. I mean, I've heard that these moderate income housing units, rental apartments, they're no different than the other units. They might have, in terms of square footage, I think, and they might have like the countertops and things like that might not be as high of a quality. But that's a question. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. Would the State Department assessments, are they accounting for some moderate incomes in that apartment project? You know, that's a sensitivity test, and we can try it out, see what happens, you know. I don't know if does that help answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I guess my concern is more just if you're using the capitalization approach to value all of those units, and 15% of them are actually significant reductions, especially if you get into low income units, and a lot of times there are requirements for low income units. It drives down the cash flow, and obviously it then compromises the valuation
Right.
for your perspective.
Yeah.
And I don't know the specific answers to your question either about how does
Yeah.
SStat reflect that. I'm not sure.
Well, so this is the kind of thing. So we can run that scenario and see what happens, right? So that.
No, I think, Jeff, I think we can. Yeah, I think we can check with the SDAT, ask the question about whether when they assessed it, because of people pay less, then does that mean like for those 15% assumption there, does that mean the assessable value also goes down? It may not be, but I think we will verify that. Well, we can talk to them to find it out.
Yeah. Okay. So we did a few checks too, because you come up with these methodology and you always have to ask yourself, is it reasonable, right? And so if you take the current income tax collected and you divide it by the total existing homes in the county, the average house actually pays about $3,900 per year for local income tax to Howard County. The fiscal model, if you take the ultimate results of all the 25,000 units, so that shouldn't be a dollar. That should be, that dollar sign should go away. Then you end up with 2,900 per home on average. So it's less, and so maybe we're being too conservative. However, you know, the future projections are different than the current situation on the ground. We're building more apartments and condos, which have a less value than currently exists in the county. The proportion of multifamily is greater. So in that sense, it does make sense that we're going to have lower yields. Now, if it was higher, then it would be a problem, right? But it is lower, as you can see, based on what we discovered here. My sense is I think we're taking a conservative approach. But you know, I think in general we want to be as accurate as possible, but it might be on the conservative side, meaning under projecting revenues that might be coming in. So the third type of methodology is this per capita employee, and basically it's taking these various things and like, for example, beer and wine license, $200,000, just divide it by per capita. So we're assuming that's going to go up as the population goes up. Some of these don't go up; they're fixed or offset. So, for example, you know, building permits, they're really meant to pay for and fund and the Department of Inspections licenses and permits. So they basically offset their fees to pay for those departments. So and on the operating side, we also have the offset. So we don't project future costs in all cases for some of these departments. So that's how the model projects forward in that sense. And it's also important to realize that this is a very small percentage of the budget, 0.6%. So it really has a limited impact anyways on the fiscal results. So it's just something to keep in mind. But we did make an effort to capture every single revenue and every single cost moving forward. Now, the one-time revenues, as I mentioned, there's three categories. The transfer tax, which is 1.25%. It was recently raised from 1%. And I think the proportion that was raised was for the school portion and I don't think everything was, is that right, Holly? It wasn't like raised in proportion. In any event, this was the current breakdown. So you take the 1.25% and it goes to specifically these functions here.
Yeah, and that was based on the legislation. State legislation has the different piece of transfer tax designated for different purpose. For example, there's a fixed percentage goes to the school construction project. There's a certain percentage go to recreational parks. Some are related to fire capital projects there. So that was the designated different pieces there. So anything here was basically designated. Designated type of revenues, basically.
Right. Yeah. And that comes out on the end of the fiscal model. And so this is, again, a one-time fee, 1.25% at time of construction based on the value of the house. The next is the road excise tax, and that's a per square foot charge of $1.67 per square foot. And you can see the square footage by unit type. Homes in the rural west are bigger, so we split those up, and then you have these homes. It's important to remember that oftentimes people see these sizes and say these are, too big, but what's assessed is all of the unfinished basements and garages as well. So it's basically, they call it the livable square footage, enclosed square footage for the home that's built. These values, these square foot sizes, came directly from the Department of Inspection's database. So they assess the fee based on the square footages. So these square footages came from their database. And so we applied those square footages. Home sizes have been increasing over time. And so I'm trying to look at the footnotes. So we looked at June 2019 through August 2022. We try to capture the latest and greatest home sizes, and that's the averages that have been built in the last year and a half or so. And the third excise tax is the school excise tax. It's also known as the school surcharge. And that's, again, times based on an amount of $7.50 per square foot, recently raised over the last 3 years, phased in. Again, multiplied times the household size, and then those are carried forward. So the cost methodologies is similar to revenues. There's three types. There's a marginal, and then we use calls for service, which I'll talk about in a minute, for public safety, police and fire. And then we use the per capita employee methodology for the other costs. So school operations, more than 50% of the budget, and this is the methodology we used. We looked at the latest capital budget and looked at the current projects. So for high school, we used High School 13, constructed about $130 million. That's going to open next fall. It's almost finished. If you look at the capacity, number of seats in that school, it ends up about 1,658 students. You end up with a cost per student of $46,800. So that cost, that one-time cost, is applied per that student that comes to the school system that lives in a new house. And then for elementary schools, we used Talbot Springs replacement. So that was a tear down and replacement. So the cost for that was $43 million. And for middle schools, we looked at the Oakland Mills renovation replacement also, and that's about $56 million. And then we made an estimate of land costs. And if you add land costs, 50 acres for high school, this is the standard required, 30 acres for middle school and 20 for elementary school, you end up with this cost per student, $54,000 for high school, $51,000 for middle school, and $37,000 for elementary school. For operating costs, you take the total operating budget, divide it by the current enrollment, and it's about $11,000 per student per year. So that operating cost is carried forward into the future. As the fiscal model, by the way, does not include, it assumes fixed costs. We don't assume inflation moving forward. So all dollars are current dollars. The school system also gets money from the state and the federal government. We don't include those in the fiscal analysis since we're only looking at the county budget. So the total revenues per student in Howard County is about $17,400 per student each year. Howard County's portion of that is $11,300. So student generation rates, you need to multiply these costs times the students that live in homes. So the student generation rates are basically the number of children from new construction living in newly homes built. So this came from the Office of School Planning in the Howard County Public School System. And we did use 2015 to 2019 averages. I had recent conversations with them and we looked at 2020 and 21, but there seemed to be anomalies, and in many cases, the value seemed low. And so it could be because of COVID and all of the disruption that caused the last few years. So we decided to stick to the 2015 to 2019 yields, which is also similar to what we did in the previous scenarios in the scenario analysis for HOCO by design last year. So it's consistent with that as well. So you can see these rates, we break them down by planning area as well as by unit type. Apartment have less students generally in Howard County, well, in all counties because of they have less bedrooms, smaller units. In Columbia, for example, the yields are very low. The units that are being built in downtown Columbia do not have a lot of school children. I think we looked at that in detail. Of what's built there now, there's about 57 students coming out of those units. There's a lot of one bedrooms and studios, and so that if you have higher proportions of one bedrooms and studios, you're going to have singles living in those units, and they're really not marketed to families, although families can certainly live in those. So we try to customize the yields based on the location in the county. And then based on that, here's the projected students.
Hey, Jeff, what are your assumptions on bedroom counts per multifamily unit? And is there any way that that's controlled in your approvals process for a project?
Well, it's not controlled in the approval process. We don't look at who's moving into homes.
I guess my point is just if you're delivering 3-bedroom multifamily units as opposed to 1-bedroom and studio, it's going to have a vast difference on student count.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Right. So I guess one way to answer that is in Columbia, what's been built in Columbia, these yields come from the school system based on recent construction. So basic recent construction in downtown Columbia yields very low students, 0.0249 per apartment unit. And so it's based on that. It's higher in other places depending where the new apartments are built. So for example, a new apartment recently built in Ellicott City is 0.1867. So I guess to answer your question, you're right, there's all sorts of variables and factors. These are really based on averages, based on recent construction. So I guess it assumes that average recent construction is going to be the same thing as future construction in terms of bedroom size and various apartments given these locations. Now, one way to measure how this is working is it's generating close to 7,000 students. And this can be compared actually to the school system's recent feasibility study that only goes 10 years, but it projects students from their feasibility study. And I think the feasibility study is over 10 years is very similar to these projections. It might even be less. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that their feasibility study is very complex in terms of projecting students. It doesn't just look at new construction. It also looks at turnover of existing housing. It looks at cohort survival from grades, one grade to the next. It looks at birth rates. Birth rates have been falling. So I think the school system is actually projecting a little bit lower growth than what this 7,000 units is showing based on this new projection. But that is a check to kind of look at what they're projecting versus this. But again, this is a marginal analysis looking at the fiscal impacts of only new growth. So I only have 3 more slides, so I appreciate you listening to all this. So the police operating cost methodology is, we use and police costs are, the 3rd highest cost in the county, so it's important to get this, as accurate as possible. We use a per person, we look at calls for service. So the police, they have calls for service. They go out into the community and they're a reasonable way to do their budget. And this is the way Urban Analytics also did it, is you look at their database, how many calls for service are for residential, how many are for non-residential, percent share. And then you take that budget and then you divide that percent share by the budget. So you're attributing 43% to residential, 56% to non-residential. Divide the 46% by the number of people living in the county right now, and then you get a cost per person. So that cost is applied to each new person added to the county moving forward. And same with non-residential trips. It's a cost per trip. A trip basically meaning a car trip. And the reason we use trips is because it's a way to try to indicate that there's more calls for service for police and fire also for EMS and things like that in where people are located, like high volumes of people. So retail, there's a lot greater calls for service. These are basically trip factors. And so where people drive to. And so retail has a greater proportion of police and fire costs, basically. Less by fire and even less for office and even less for manufacturing and warehousing. There's less employees working at these large places. So the calls for service are less. So we try to proportion it that way to determine the police costs and also the fire costs. And then lastly, we have this per capita methodology, similar to the way we had the per capita methodology for revenues. Things like, the county council, we assume that the county council's budget will increase as the county grows in general. So as for every new person or job added to the county, since they represent people and jobs, it will go up. And so you take the current levels of service, it's $7.48 per job and person moving forward. And again, the percentage of these other sorts of costs are less. And so it's reasonable to use these averages rather than a marginal approach. So conclusions of all this, and again, I didn't go through all the methodologies, but wanted to give a general overview of the sort of thinking that went into this. But please look at that document if you're interested, and you can look at the methodologies we use for everything. So generally, we know, and this came out from other fiscal studies, that new growth generates positive fiscal results based on the current levels of service. One thing to keep in mind, the reason for this is that because the largest revenues are property and income taxes, and local income tax is unique. So a lot of places don't have local income tax. In Maryland, of course, all counties do, but many states around the country don't. And a good example of this, because people often say, like, a house can't be positive because it has all these school costs. We need more commercial. Well, in Howard County and other counties in Maryland, residential is positive. I used to work as a fiscal consultant in my previous job for about 7 years, 2 different consulting firms a while back now. Traveled to different states and counties around the country and cities. And a good example is, remember doing a fiscal study once in Scottsdale, Arizona, so Maricopa County. Now that local tax structure is set up where 60% of the revenues came from local sales tax. Howard County doesn't have a sales tax, a local sales tax. It has a state sales tax, and it gets some of the money back from sales in Howard County. It doesn't have a local sales tax. Maricopa County, 60% of the revenues came from local sales tax. So retail was really important. If you build all homes and no retail, it's not going to be good from a fiscal perspective. Another example is in Dublin, Ohio, which is outside of Columbus. They collect local income tax by place of work. I don't know if they still do, but they did 20 years ago or so. So Dublin, Ohio, if they're planning, they wanted to build office buildings. So if you didn't live in Dublin, let's say you lived in Columbus, but you commuted into Dublin and you worked in an office building in Dublin, you paid local income tax to the city of Dublin. So they were all about office space. They didn't care about retail, and the homes that were built had to be generally subsidized by the office space. So the point is, it really depends on the tax structure of the community, and every community is unique. In Maryland, the tax structure is such that we have local income tax by place of residence, and that's why residential growth is a positive in Howard County. And there's also one-time revenues, as I mentioned before, which is a fair amount of one-time revenues that also come from new construction through these various excise taxes and transfer and recordation taxes. We all know that school is the most significant cost. So the model accounted for that, and it's showing that new growth is paying for those costs. So new growth does pay for itself, and it's been built into the fiscal structure of the county that way for decades, right? The county has been growing for decades. The budget has been built around that growth for decades. So it makes sense that as the county grows, the growth is an important part of the revenue to the county and the fiscal structure to the county. That's not good or bad. It's just the way things are. And so one thing to keep in mind is that as the pace of growth changes, the county will have to be aware of that. And the net revenues from new growth, which is basically additional revenues being used to fund the budget and also to pay for other needs in the county and other infrastructure needs. As that slows or changes, the county just be aware of that the revenues used to pay for these things may not be as much as we're used to. The other thing to keep in mind is, and this is what's talked about in the summary document, the county is aging. So, the county, a lot of the infrastructure built in the counties in the 50s and 60s and 70s schools, they're 40 years old now, 50 years old. So starting about the last 10 years and going to be more pronounced into the future, a lot of the infrastructure needs of the county are going to need to be rebuilt and renovation. Those costs are new to the history of Howard County. That will have to be paid for. And so if new growth helps with the net revenues to pay for that, if that changes, that might make those things more difficult. So the summary document recommends that these renovation rehabilitation needs really be built into the capital budget and thought about moving forward and over the next 20 years of the planning horizon for HOCO by design. So that's a summary of the things, and we welcome questions and comments. And then, as Holly mentioned, we're going to try to take your comments and questions, and then come back on the 10th to try to have further discussion.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So it's a lot of information to digest there. As Jeff mentioned, that the methodology itself is very comprehensive, but not significantly different from, I think, was it 2000 or 2019 when there's a consultant hired through competitive bidding. Urban Analytics did some Apple related study. They're not exactly the same thing, but like similar. So the approach here is not that different from that, but it's more refined and use more reasoned data here. But we are open to questions. And Todd, thank you very much for raising that during the middle of that. So these are really good questions. So welcome other people there to jump in and ask questions. Just make sure unmute yourself when you ask questions. Thanks.
I'll jump in again. I assume other people will have some too, but I guess the biggest thing that I see is that the costs associated with the new residents goes on forever. The one-time revenues end at build out largely. So the issue, it seems to me, isn't whether or not it's a net positive from 2023 to 2040. It's what's the cost to the budget from 2041 on, given that the one-time revenues are gone and we still have to provide services to all those new residents.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the conundrum, right? So the growth has been built into the fiscal structure of the county. And so to the extent that that growth stops or slows after 2040, then the fiscal structure of the county is going to change. And so there'll have to be a different way to fund county government.
Yeah, I can chime in on something, Todd. There's a couple of things. One is that for all those new development, there are costs generated related to construction, and there's also on the infrastructure side, there's also costs related for service related for the county, right? But on the revenue side, there's two portions. Some are one time, that's like the designate large number of different transfer tax as well as school surcharge, road excise tax, etc. But it's also ongoing type of revenue, significant in terms of property tax, income tax, etc. And that's get built into the base, will stay there. So that's that will be ongoing part on that there. And then so even the designated piece there for capital, that was actually pretty significant. That will be used to fund the construction, but also there's also ongoing revenues and get compounded when you get new development. So that actually combined just based on the model, and that was going to have a net gains to the county when you count on the ongoing and one-time revenues compared to ongoing and one-time capital and operating costs there. So that's one part of that.
I think if you look at the summary slide, the one-time revenues are significant, but even if you take those out, it's still fiscally positive a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. The other thing though is, given that the single largest one-time revenue per unit is the school surcharge, is that just dumping into the county's general fund, or is that reserved for school construction or school operations?
The designated type of revenue, sir, can only serve for that purpose there. So you cannot use it for other purpose on that. So for example, school surcharge, there's a portion designated to capital for school capital project, and that's always only used for school piece on that. But if that's not enough, then there are other funding to fill in the gap on that there. But in general, the designated piece on that will be only used for that purpose there. But on the general fund side there, that part was not designated. For example, the new home generate new income tax, an increase of income tax as well as property tax. That's not designated. That's go to the pool. But go to the pool, it's used to fund debt service for everybody. That's including the school capital debt service. They're including the school. So it's really both the general revenue and the combined designated are used to fund capital projects.
So if you look at the marginal costs of the school system going on an annualized basis, does the school surcharge cover that, or is it actually falling to the general fund?
I think it's a combination on that there. It's not I think school surcharge itself is not covering that. We can go back and check the model on that. But there's other revenue generated from the new development that was used to fund that there. With that, I think it's still net positive.
Yeah. To Todd, to your first point, on the fiscal model that they're doing for the growth, that has a lowest possible income to get into a housing unit, since income is the second largest tax base, and that escalates over time. So that mitigates to some extent. That's part of the difference between the average cost of new housing in the model. So when you buy a house, your income tends to increase more than your payments. So that does mitigate to some extent the point you raised about the difference between the new growth and the existing cost. But the change in in land use is going to be what's going to hit us. And then I think since I worked with urban analytics in the first one, the school surcharge goes back into capital, right? So the school charge, and then the cost of capital is on an average cost per student, correct, Jeff? So that
Yes,
cost gets baked in. So the one-time revenue is only counted against the cost of lending or borrowing that year. And then the additional cost of the infrastructure bounces back into the model through average cost of capital per student. Am I right, Jeff? So that also is getting to some extent baked in.
yeah, I think so.
Does that answer your question? I'm sorry to jump in to answer Jeff's question.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right, Richard. And I'm so glad Richard is here because Richard was a big part of the urban analytics study and understands this stuff very well. So the other thing to keep in mind, I think the school surcharge doesn't pay for the entire school capital cost needs for new growth. So the model also assumes general obligation bond debt funding. So and
Right.
the way it currently works, the school surcharge is really, even though it increased significantly, it's still not enough to pay. It was never intended to pay for all the schools for new growth. It's a supplement.
Well, there's probably not a single thing in here that's right. The issue is not whether or not any single thing is right. The issue is, in the aggregate, are you making mistakes on both sides that tend to even out? And I would say that's probably the situation. I mean, a great example is single family detached housing construction in Elkridge, Columbia, Ellicott City. You can't build a house and sell it for $650,000 now. And that's basically the estimate that you're providing. And the reality is, if you can do it for less than 750 or 8, you're lucky anymore. So I think that's probably way understated. So
Right.
I think that the errors are all over the place, and that's fine. That's just the way it goes with modeling.
Yeah.
It's whether or not they're evening out across all of the assumptions.
Right. Yeah, you're right. And the value of it, the value of it is to do the sensitivity analysis testing. So for example, I increased the loan rate to 7% to see what happened. And instead of like an average of 52 million, annual average net revenue is 52 million, it went up to average annual net revenues of 59 million.
Right.
So you sort of can see what the impacts of some of these assumptions have to come up with a reasonable, is this reasonable? Is this projecting, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
The bigger structural problem with this model, having worked on the past model, not this model, is the use of average cost per student fixed, because we all know that the school raises the amount more than so that the biggest because that's I can't remember the exact number, 80% of 60 to 80% of expense is education in the county. I can't remember the exact number. So the biggest implicit bias in the estimation method is the use of fixed cost of an average cost per student based on year one, which we all know that grows more over time.
So there are different parts when it comes to school. We actually took relatively conservative approach, meaning that we are acting on the error of overestimate on school related stuff, underestimate on the revenue side. So a couple examples, because in this model, there per student from the new construction, we're assuming they stay in the school system forever. So no matter it's new construction or cost there, we don't assume they'll go out of school at a certain point there. We assume they stay in elementary school, middle school, high school, this infrastructure needs, we assume that stay there forever there. And operating, we're not assuming they're going to leave at some point there, because it's very hard to know when the house change hands, whether there will be, they graduate, maybe could other kids there. So we're just assuming that. So I think we did our best, try to be as conservative as possible there to offset any other pieces there possible.
Well, one of the things on the cost per student, it seems to me that as we go to lower average income per student, per household or per lower family income per student, put it that way, that the costs and the requirements and the services that are required that the school system has to provide will probably be going up marginally. The other thing that has my eye is we're assuming that apartments are going to produce the same, or multifamily in general will produce the same number of students per unit going forward. And I wonder if that's true, given that we're changing the composition of our housing. So the old model was you move in, you live in an apartment, then you buy your first townhouse, then you have your kids, then you move from your townhouse to your single family, your permanent house, or maybe you move up again. As the number of apartments as a percentage of the total units goes up, does that model change? And do we end up generating more students per apartment or students per multifamily unit in general than we do now, because there aren't as many move-up options relative to the number of apartments? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm just wondering that, you know, all of this is kind of assuming we're going to do the same thing going forward as we are now. But it seems that as unit mixes change, then behavior is going to change because the options aren't the same anymore.
It could be, although on the other hand, a lot of these new units being built, you know, these mixed use type units, I'm thinking of downtown Columbia, they're in general, because they're apartments, they have 1 or 2 bedrooms. There's not that many 3-bedroom, for example. Whereas most all townhomes and new single family homes, you know, have 3 or 4 bedrooms, right? So there is a certain reality of smaller units not having as many school children. But you're right, trends could change with the housing market and people wanting to continue to come to Howard County because of the schools. I showed last week, the household size was increasing a little bit in Howard County.
Yep.
So that, you know, might reflect part of what you're saying.
Well, one other thing real quick on just on the valuation side, you use the capitalization approach to value those multifamily properties. One thing way down in the details in one of your footnotes to that slide, you used a cap rate from summer of 21, which was the latest one that was available. I mean, cap rates are 300, 400 basis points different now than they were then. And it has an enormous impact on if you're valuing those properties on a capitalization approach, like 35% lower if you use current cap rates than the 5% or 5.23 I think you used in yours. I couldn't find current, you know, an actual study of current cap rates, but having sold a building just before, call it the collapse in the interest rate environment and what they are now, it is 300 basis points, 350 basis points change in cap rates, and that is a huge driver of valuation.
So if cap rates go down, the value goes up. Is that right?
Yeah, because you're using a number at 5%, which means you're basically using 20 times cash flow. Right. If it goes to 10%, it's 10 times cash flow.
I see.
And so cap rates go from 5.2 to 8. It's 12.5 times cash flow instead of 20 times cash flow, and that ends up being a reduction of nearly a third in valuation. And the reason that's so important, I think, is that the multifamily developers have armies of people who contest every valuation, and it's not like a single family home. One single family home contests a valuation. It makes no difference. Mm-hmm. An apartment building of 300 units that contests the valuation, and they use current cap rates as opposed to your 5.2, we're going to get killed.
Yeah.
Again, this is a 30-year model, though. So some of
I understand that I understand, but we're at 5.2. That's a historical low. as opposed to a reasonable midpoint. I agree with you, Richard. It's not going to stay at 8 or 8.5% forever, but it could be pretty sticky here for a while.
Yeah. And that's a question that we could test, right? And then we can say,
Yep.
what?
Yeah, we can try to see
We
what
can
does
try
that
it,
mean.
and we know, that's an important variable because a lot of units are good apartments, right? So a lot of valuation in the model. 12,000 of the 25,000 are apartment units, right? So that would have an impact. We can just see how much it would have an impact by running a different cap rate through it.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, we can do sensitivity test based on changing that variable, and I would assume conceptually that would change the impact on the income tax as well as. Does that also change assessment value?
Well, the income tax is based on the average apartment rental rate. So, so
Right, but if you have different affordability now, the based on.
right. Yeah, it could. Yep, it could. Yep.
Well, my guess is, Jeff, for what it's worth, that your average rental rate per apartment is low.
That's what I was going to say. Is also you have to remember that as scarcity happened in Howard County, both rents and housing costs have appreciated much more than the long-term average,
Right.
and that's likely to continue. Which, again, as you said earlier, the any long-term fiscal modeling situation, you're erring on one side. You're hoping your errors are offsetting, as you said. But long-term, Howard County, because of its position, has rents, housing values, property values grow more than the average growth nationally, regionally, and that's unlikely to ever stop in the near, or at least ever is a long term. I don't ever want to say that. In the next 10 to 20 years, Howard County will continue to appreciate. So again, that offsets some of the CapEx issues you're talking about as rents go up because of scarcity. Revenues go up, which offsets some of the impact of the CapEx. So again, the model's got to work over 30 years, and it can't take into all of account the systematic biases, as you said, are hopefully offsetting.
So you're saying that the rent rate of 2,000, what was it, 2,200 a month or something is low? That's your feeling?
That's definitely my feeling.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is also going to grow because of scarcity.
Right.
Higher than you're using your costing model is based on current costs holding in inflation adjusted terms, but the cost of renting in Howard County every year, probably the past 20 years, has grown more rapidly than inflation. That again offsets to some extent the issue of what the CapEx rate. Are you using a too low of a CapEx rate?
Right.
Because one part is revenue, one part is CapEx. If revenue goes up, even if CapEx is a little low, it would be offsetting in the long term because the rent's going to grow.
Right.
Yeah, and I think you're probably at 2,200. You're probably low, and it's 650,000 per single family detached home. I know you're low
in Elkridge, right? The average in like Ellicott City is close to 900,000.
Right.
Again, these just came from actual data, and then the rural west is 1.1 million. That. So yeah, right. But the
construction cost per square foot isn't any different in Elkridge than it is in Glenwood. So you can't just and yeah, the land cost might be marginally different in per building unit in Elkridge than it is in Glenwood, but my guess is that those numbers are generally low. It's really, really hard to deliver a product that somebody, that a home builder can make money on and somebody wants to buy for the number that you have, especially in Elkridge. But I think it's true in Ellicott City too. I mean, if you even look at like the Sunnel development where they're selling for, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 on 8,000 square feet, the lot size. I mean, it's crazy.
Right.
To think you're going to deliver a home for 650, I just don't think. I think those days are done.
So we can, so again, we could say, what if all the rates were up by 20%? The values
Right.
at home, what impact would that have? And you can
It only helps your surplus, you know, your
Yeah,
budgetary
exactly.
surplus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. These are all really good points and questions. Thank you. So Holly, is the intent then to, I guess on the 10th, we'll gather questions, including the ones we received today, and then do some analyses and come back to show some of these sensitivities on the 10th?
Right. I think, at today's meeting, because people might still take time to digest.
Right.
So I appreciate the questions already, but like some people might need a little more time to read on that. They might have questions later. So I would suggest to the committee, and I'll send an email later, that if you have any additional questions, please feel free to send to me, and I'll pass on to Jeff and others there. Then we can work on that together. And please do your best to send us in by close of business next Monday, which is December 19th, given the holiday leaves and traveling there. So we allow time for staff to work together and put together the responses there. And then ideally, Jeff, if we can try to send it before January 10th back to the group about the questions and the answers there, and use the January 10th to catch up on any follow-up and response or sensitivity test, which will be good for people to know, to understand the impact if we change one or two variables that people feel like will be interesting to see. Then we can see and help people understand what is the impact on that there. And also any clarification questions as well, feel free to send in there, and also comments if you see other things there, let us know on that there. So ideally January 10th will be the part we do the follow-up and the Q&A. And also based on discussion so far, we will try to have staff generate a very brief summary report, bring back as well on that. Then that will, for the group, again, we'll try to send the group in advance so people get a chance to review, so we can use January 10th meetings to also go over that very quickly. And that report, just FYI, we're thinking of taking a similar approach as another special project of the committee several years ago. At that point, the committee was tasked to generate, on top of the March 1st routine report, another special report at that point regarding the P3 for the courthouse there. So what happens at that point is a committee kind of reviewed and listened to consultant, and then kind of come up very brief summary, but attach the materials from those different presentations, including in this case, like Jeff, your detailed methodology, all those things can be attachment there. The report itself will be very brief, kind of like highlights all the major issues there, as well as if there are any critical Q&A, we can kind of touch upon that as well. So that's the intention for January the 10th. Any other questions? Okay, I think, yeah, and by the way, these are all good discussions. Thank you very much, Jeff, and also for Dr. Clench and Todd for asking really great questions there too. And maybe other people may need a little bit warm up, or maybe because you're so thorough, Jeff, you already answered a lot of people's probably potential questions already there. But another thing I want to say is these are an important discussion, because the general plan update is a big deal. It's kind of like mapping out at least a targeted growth in the next 10 years and beyond, basically 18 years in this model covering there. And it has a lot of implications there, because as Jeff mentioned earlier, in terms of long-term trend, before this, you were seeing the counties running out of space, running out of land, and also it's predicted there the new development or the building capacity will drop significantly. So there's a sustainability issue there, and with the Hoco by design, it will still be a slowdown compared to what has been experienced in the last 2 decades there, but at least sustain some growth rather than a sudden kind of drop completely, like you run up everything. So again, but as Amy, the director, mentioned the last time, and also Jeff mentioned today, is that to execute that plan, it will need legislative change, zoning, and a lot of other market, all kinds of factors to play there. But this is just give you a perspective, a vision, and also the fiscal impact analysis is important to help understand what does that mean for the county in terms of revenue, what does that mean for the county for expenditure based on unique structure of the county in terms of cost and nature, in terms of revenue structure on that, so you understand in the bulk. The details can still be debatable, and in reality, these are assumptions anyway when you do 20-year, 18-year projections there. But the conclusion, I would say, is still very solid because, as I mentioned earlier, that in doing this staff, we together already trying to do conservative approach in terms, maybe in a lot of cases, underestimated revenues and maybe overestimate costs in some cases there, because we want to make sure we cover all the possibility there. But in reality, things could still change there and have different results there. So I think the general conclusion may not change too much. The magnitude might swing and to the good or to the bad on that, and we'll be happy to run different scenarios if people have a critical variables want to test that.
Thank you. And I would just add that, you know, we don't have growth because of the fiscal impacts, the importance of the fiscal. We have growth because there's a demand and people want to move to Howard County. There's growth throughout the region, and we want to create nice communities for people to live in, right? And so that's really the main point of the HOCO by design, is to create nice communities for people to live in, given the demand of future growth. And given that, we do want to measure the fiscal impacts, and we learn from that also, but it's just only one indicator. There's a huge discussion in the general plan about housing affordability. You know, the more you limit growth, the more housing becomes unaffordable. So that's another whole issue that Howard County needs to try to deal with, is how to provide more affordable housing. So the fiscal impacts obviously are just one measure of the whole plan.
That's very true, and thank you for clarifying on that, because the HOCO by design, I mean, at the last meeting, I think you heard from the experts about it's a very comprehensive process run in the last few years. They're incorporating both consultants projecting on the market demands, needs in terms of jobs, in terms of housing in this area, just based on market study, as well as the numerous input from residents and business from this area regarding what's needed there, and that's incorporated into the HOCO by design, reflecting multiple rounds of such discussion. This is mostly to say, based on that, what does that mean financially speaking on that? So this is not the driver for that, but it's associated there, and we try to understand what does that mean for the county and financially speaking. Yeah. All right, thank you. I don't know. Amy or others, do you have anything to add from DPZ or the rest of the group? Do you have anything to add before we conclude?
Nothing for me, Holly. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
I think there's a question, Holly.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Khalida. I was wondering, I might have missed it, but I was wondering when you were taking into the schools factor, the cost per student, whether you factored in like blueprint requirements moving forward, or was this based on previous? Because I think that there's going to be a large impact in terms of pre-K capacity as well as cost per student. So was that factored into it?
No, it wasn't. It was really based on the current levels of service. That's an important point. So, for example, an example of that, if the levels for service are going to increase through Blueprint by making universal pre-K, that will have a cost component that's not included in this. An example of that for Howard County is, there was a requirement to create all-day kindergarten. And so that had a big fiscal impact in the county because the level of service went up. It used to be half-day kindergarten, all-day kindergarten. You had to build twice the number of school seats. Yeah. So that's a very important point. Yeah.
So that part, as Jeff mentioned there, because the model itself there cannot predict too much about what's going to happen. There will be a lot of assumption into assessable base, because that would the growth will, because we don't have inflation, right? The assessable growth might be higher. There are other component could be higher on the cost side there. That's not part of that. The other thing is for Blueprint, actually, when we have the school budget discussion, we can dive a little more into it, is we actually have a couple meetings with the state Department of Legislative Services there, they are actually indicate blue by print there, as you just mentioned, right, Dr. Claudia. They have the different milestone requirement, but at the same time, they will also provide more funding from the state, from both operating and the capital side there, build to learn, all those different things to help with that. And actually, they indicate, the state officials indicated repeatedly, including our own senators, said they're like, the intention is not to provide unfunded mandate to local, but involve some reprioritization in the school system as well, to in terms of just the priorities here. In reality, obviously, every year we give to the school actually above the baseline growth there. Based on maintenance effort, etc. So the per average probably underestimate what we actually provided to do that there, but all those are coming to the play. But the intention is not to generate more cost to local than normal. You really we probably would try to help out anyway on that there. But for this one, the model, you really cannot predict the policy and other structure changes down the road at this point there. It's more simplified, use the snapshot and assuming the growth pattern and we are predicting, and then try to beat into both revenue and expenditure. Otherwise, there will be too much variables at this point.
I just went out. Well, that's crazy. I didn't hit that.
Ellen, do you have a question?
I just, my screen just went crazy. But anyway, I was going to add that, yes, we haven't looked at state contributions to any of these pieces. So roughly on the operating side, there's a state contribution, and on the capital side as well, because we don't go forward with the project without state approval and such. So, we're looking at a limited piece of that cost in some of these numbers.
Right, that's exactly true. And as Jeff mentioned that, because we're looking at the county's cost,
the county contribution, not
and
the
the county's
state
revenue. Yeah. So for this purpose, there we're excluding the state aid and other sources there, and grants, all those different pieces on that, and also because it's very hard to predict what's going to happen on that there. But that's maybe indirectly, but not directly impacted here, because these we try to look at the county's fiscal impact there.
Yeah, we're looking at the county budget, but there are additional sources that offset.
But there are other implications. Very true. Yeah. All right. Just also quick logistics on the next meeting. So the next meeting will be on the January 3rd. That one, actually, we take a break from local by design. So that one we will, at this point, we're targeting at two main topics. One is, I think, the county administration, and together with department will talk about the state and the federal aid on COVID. So we could have an overview about what we receive, what was allocated, to nonprofits, to different entities, education entities, to business and residents there, on different, to help out people to resist and rise from the pandemic. So that will be a main subject. The other subject will be a business panel discussion. And a couple of years ago, I think EDA did a very successful one. And from their perspective, and also sometimes have a couple of representatives from the business area. So to understand our business view from about the economy, and what do they see, what do they experience, and that will help inform our policy making and also fiscal policies and budget development as well on that. So that's expected for January 3rd. And on January 10th, as Jeff mentioned, we'll continue our discussion and try to wrap up the fiscal impact analysis, and then we will develop the report accordingly. Thank you very much. If no further questions, and hopefully see most of you on January 3rd. And since I may not see you before, some of you before the holidays, just happy holidays in advance, and wish you a very nice Christmas and New Year. And we'll see you again in January. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.